you, Lynda? But her other book, Dear Edward, got wonderful reviews as well, also made all the bestseller lists. I understand it's a very sad book, but a very poignant book as well. She wrote two other novels. One was A Good Hard Look, and another one is called Within Arm's Reach. And what's interesting is that book, Within Arm's Reach, is going to be reissued with a new cover, and so that's going to be available again. The author received an MFA, a Master's in Fine Arts from NYU. She's taught fiction for the Brooklyn College's MFA program. She has also taught at NYU's School of Continuing and Professional Studies. She has led all kinds of conferences at the Gotham Writers Workshop, and she lives in Brooklyn with her husband and her two sons. In listening to some of the interviews about her, what I came to realize is that the way this book began, the way it was, the germ of the idea is that she set out to write about a very lonely boy who was very unloved. What would it be like for him to grow up with this kind of childhood, unloved, and how would it be for him to observe and then become part of a warm and loving family? She wanted to see what would happen to him. Could he move forward in the world when emotionally cut off from his parents? And she wanted to highlight, she says this in her interviews, she wants to highlight mental health, the whole concept of severe depression. She wants to be very realistic in her writing. And that's why when she talks about William, who obviously suffers from depression, she talks about his need for psychiatric care, his need for medication. She really emphasizes that. And she says we need to talk about it because it's very prevalent. Depression is very, it's something that we're so concerned about with children, especially these days. And it's important to note how childhood experiences affect the way one later lives their life. And certainly we see that theme in this story of William. The other thing that really interested her, she says when she was young, she used to sleep over her friend's house, and this friend had a mother who had 5 sisters. And she was very fascinated by these sisters, and she wanted to find out what was it for them to be so rooted. And she loved the way they interacted, these sisters. She says they all looked sort of alike, and she loved watching their interactions. So this was something that garnered her interest, and certainly she goes ahead and writes about it in this story. She says each of these characters, the women characters here, have a little bit of herself. Each of the characters, that is, except for Rose and Julia. They were a little bit more controlling. I don't think she sees that part in herself. And she sees that there's also kind of a mean side to Rose. So Rose ended up being one of the tougher characters. She rewrote Rose several times, she says. She began writing this book at the start of the pandemic, around April 2020. And at the same time, her father passed away. And she says at that point, she was feeling like the whole world was upside down. She explains that writing this book was a kind of therapy for her. She says she felt a pull to write it, and she uses the words, a feverish drive to complete the book. And the scenes were very poignant for her, and one in particular. How many of you remember, and I remember the story, that there's a mother, Rose, there's a father, Charlie, and then there's the daughters, right? Julia's the oldest. Julia's the organizer of the family. We've got Sylvie, who's sort of the dreamer in the family. She's 10 months younger than Julia. And then we've got these 2 younger twin sisters, Cecilia and Emmeline. Well, there was one scene when the father, Charlie, passes away, if you remember this scene. And what was very beautiful was that when she was writing this, she loved the idea that these people were all together, the mother, the girls, and it was very powerful because these characters got to be together at that terrible time. Whereas when her father died during COVID, totally isolated. She talks about that they couldn't be at his bedside. Lynda, yeah. Go.
I don't think that was true, Lynda. They weren't all together because only the father went to the hospital to see the baby, not the mother. And when he turned around to walk down the hallway, that's when he had his heart attack. So no one was with him.
but they were all able to grieve. They were all
Oh,
able to
okay. I didn't understand that.
able to
Okay,
grieve. And she,
right.
yes,
Yes, right.
that's the point that she's trying to say, is that they were all, and there were, and we'll talk about that at length, because that's a very, you bring up such an important part of the story, right? How that all
Right.
happened.
Okay.
But
Sorry.
for her, yeah, no, but the idea that they were all sort of emotionally joined at that point, and the others were together. Cecilia is not together with them, but the other sisters and the mother were together, which of course, there was a lot of conflict that emerged out of that meeting, anyways. So she says she was able to grieve through her characters. She felt lonely and fractured, and like William in the story, she too was longing for a warm and a loving family. The other thing that was interesting that I picked up during those interviews was her obsession with basketball. Because, right, that's what William plays, basketball. Her family, she says, was into soccer, but nonetheless, she herself was into basketball. And I think one of the reasons that she liked the idea of basketball for William, her character, is that it is one sport you can play alone, right? Also, it is a very important part of it when you're really playing a game of basketball is the importance of a team. And if you remember in the story, one of the most important characters for William is Kent, who was his roommate at the time, right? But also, Kent was he was a member of this basketball team, and he turns out to be such a significant person in terms of providing strength for William, as does the whole team when William needs it. And I love the way in the interview she talks about the need for a team, for men especially. We women have a sense of being able to reach out to one another. We know when we need help, and we kind of very often reach out for that. Men, they don't have that type of support system. But the idea of a team, it gives a reason for guys to get together, for them to reach out to one another. So that's why teams are so important for men, she says, and certainly for William. All right, now I want to give you a little summary, because I know you haven't read the book in a while, and I'm going to go over the characters for you. So William is our main character. He grows up in a house silenced by tragedy. His parents could barely look at him, let alone love him. And he himself doesn't understand it at the time, but later he learns that it was the childhood death of his older sister that ends up shaping his later life. His relationship with his shattered parents is cold and distant. He's stuck with a mother who scarcely listens when he speaks. He's got a heartbreakingly remote father. In fact, one of the lines that describes the father that's powerful: with his daughter gone, the man's face never opened again. Powerful writing that she does. Fortunately for William, he goes off to college and he makes the team there. And he's gotten accepted to Northwestern, far away from his Chicago childhood home. And he's excited about the possibility of being a basketball star and making that his career. But something happens. And what happens? Do you remember what happens to poor William?
He got hurt.
Yes,
He
knee.
gets hurt. He falls. And the bad news is that he falls on the same knee that he had injured when he was playing in high school, right? So all of a sudden, that whole dream becomes sidelined. The good news for him is that he meets Julia Padovano. She is a spirited and ambitious young woman, and she surprises William because he says, What? What could she possibly see in me? Well, what she sees is a quiet steadiness. With Julia comes this wonderful family, and she's inseparable from the three younger sisters that I just described to you. Sylvie, the dreamer, happiest with her nose in a book, and she imagines a future very different from the expected path of a wife and mother. And then there's Cecilia, one of the twins. She's the family artist. She later on goes and paints murals, if you remember from the book. She's painting murals. And then there's Emmeline, who patiently takes care of all of them. She's the sweetest, kindest, most gentle sister of them all. And happily, this warm and loving family takes in William into this household. But then, as the book progresses, we see that William's past darkness kind of surfaces. So what do I mean by his past darkness? His childhood, this troubled childhood. And it jeopardizes not only Julia's carefully orchestrated plans for their future, but the sisters' unshakable loyalty to one another. And of course, what we end up with is a catastrophic family rift that changes their lives for generation. And so the question is, will this loyalty that once rooted them together be strong enough to eventually draw them back together when it matters most at the end? And of course, we know if we finish the book, and if you didn't finish the book, sorry for the spoiler, but it does. They're able to come back together again. Let me ask you to begin. What did you think of her style of writing? Did you enjoy it? Were you engaged right away?
Yeah. Okay.
What did you think? Yeah, Dara.
That was interesting that you have the same time frame and you have different perspective from each character
Yes.
as they went through the same time frame. And I
did
thought
you
that was
enjoy
interesting.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if anybody else did, but you got to see it from each person's personality and what how they evaluated it in their own
Yeah.
life. Yeah.
Right. No, it's true. That was a very important thing. And you know what's interesting? She was William, Sylvie, Julia, William, Sylvie, Julia. And then all of a sudden, at the midpoint of the book, she stops a lot of the Julia ones. Why is that? That was the period of time when Julia pulls away from the family. So it's kind of interesting how she structures the book. You know what I loved? Even the first sentence. For the first 6 days of William Waters' life, he was not an only child. So why is that such a good first sentence?
Well, it's setting up the book. It's setting it up for what's.
It sets it up. It sets it up. Because right away you read it and say, what? Why?
What does that
Right.
mean?
Yeah, exactly. Lynda, did you want something? You wanted to say
Well,
something?
I was going to point out that was the only time he was part of a family unit. And, you know, this thread went throughout the whole book, and that's why he was depressed and he never felt a part of anything.
Never. Yeah,
You
never.
know, being on the team and meeting the family and having people care about him. He never knew that, not
Never had
from
that.
day 6 of his life.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, that's when the parents pulled away.
Yes.
He no longer
Exactly.
had parents.
After those 6 days.
He lost his
those
sister
6
and his
days,
parents.
And that was it. Yes. The whole family shattered. So what would you say this book was about? What themes, if somebody said, what themes did you pull out?
Love, friendship,
Love.
relationships, family. a lot of
Family
things.
ties. Yeah.
So many themes.
So
Yeah.
many things.
Tragedy of
Family
death.
drama.
Family
Right.
drama. Sherry, what were you saying?
I said the tragedy of death.
Yes, so
In
much.
my family, we had a sibling that died. So it is not my family, my brother's family, but in the
Yes.
family and the tragedy that brings to a family. Now,
Yeah.
it was Williams, and there wasn't that backstory other than the fact that the parents pulled away, but that's very common.
Yeah, that it has such a powerful impact later on. So why was William's sister Caroline? What here she's this little cute redheaded girl, right? She dies. Why was she such an important character in the end in this book? Because she's a huge character in the book.
She's the catalyst for the pain.
She's the catalyst for the pain. Exactly. And of course, what's interesting for poor William is that he lives with this specter, this kind of ghost of her subconsciously, and it affects so much. Yeah, Lynda, you were gonna say?
I just wanted to go back to your last question for a second, besides, you know, the loss, etc.
Yeah.
Betrayal and forgiveness was, you know, like a big thing, you know, besides the sisterhood and the family. For me, that was my thread about the betrayal. I mean, the betrayal of so many people in that story really bothered me.
Yeah. It's a huge theme for her, and it goes on, that not just the one betrayal, right?
No.
As we go through it, that's what's so amazing. So what I think is also interesting to know about William in those early years, when he first has the injury in high school, he's a junior on the basketball team. And what I think was important to note is that when he fell and he hurt his knee, he couldn't play for the last 7 weeks of his junior year season. And when he couldn't play basketball, he felt useless. And quote, he thought about being gone like his sister. So when you read those words coming out of a high school kid, what does it make you right away realize?
He's depressed.
This is a kid who has depression. Exactly. He's talking about being gone as a high school kid. Okay, so we're not, and
He's
then so we're not
also
surprised
repressed all that has happened.
because he
He's
has no one.
he's kept it in for so long.
That's right. That he himself doesn't realize what's going on with him, and he certainly has no one to share it with. Yeah.
Yeah.
So he gets to college, and he's lucky because he meets Kent, remember, who is the wonderful friend, and he's part of a team. And for the first time in his life, he can't even figure out why this Kent is attracted to him because, after all, Kent is great with the girls. He's got loads of friends. But Kent is a good guy, and what Kent senses in him, what's going on. Now, he doesn't know anything, but he certainly senses that he's got these periods of darkness. And of course, he meets Arash, who's the other character who happens to be the coach involved with the coaching of the team, and of course ends up assisting him. He's like a physiotherapist or whatever he is for the team. And of course, that's in the end what also saves William, the relationship he's got with him. So in broad strokes, what can we say about the Padavano family and Julia? We'll talk about Julia actually in a moment, but let's first talk about the family. The mother, Rose, and the father, Charlie. So what do you want to say about Rose? Let's begin with Rose, the mother. She's an interesting character.
Cornerstone of the family.
At that time, she's the cornerstone of the family, right? And I love the way they describe that she dresses in a catcher's uniform, a baseball catcher's uniform, and works in her garden. So she's a colorful, weird character, right, from the get-go. What else do we know about Rose? Well, what's interesting is Rose's history. What's Rose's history? Well, do you remember Rose got herself pregnant? And that's why she marries Charlie. And that's really important in the story, right?
Well, she was unhappy with him.
She is unhappy with him. She marries him because she got pregnant, and that's the decision she made. She's with him. That's it.
Right.
And what happens with Rose's mother? How mad is that mother at her daughter, Rose? So mad?
Disowns her.
Disowns her. She cuts
Disowns
her out.
her, doesn't
And
she?
that's why those girls, these four cute daughters, never ever meet their grandmother because Rose got pregnant, had to get married, and that was that. Okay, so this is all really important. Why is Rose unhappy in her marriage?
Husband's not very ambitious, you know.
He's
but
not
he's-
ambitious, and she had all
Yeah.
this ambition.
Yeah.
She had plans for him, and he didn't live up to those expectations. Lynda, were you going to add
he
something?
was-
Yeah, I was also, it was interesting to me that, she was so dominant over everybody, but yet she was jealous of the fact that all her daughters loved him. She always, to herself, oh, they love him no matter what he does. I do everything for them, but him. Hello, beautiful.
Hello, beautiful. That's right. He greeted all of his daughters. How? Hello,
Hello,
beautiful.
beautiful.
Wonderful. So anyways, it turns out now that Rose is very unhappy with Charlie. He has not lived up to any of her plans. Turns out she thinks he's a deadbeat husband, but he is a fabulous father. And it's cute because Charlie says to William when he meets him, he says, "You are a lucky man because Julia, is going to be your backbone. Rose has always been mine." Well, of course, that just has frustrated Rose all of her life. She felt she was so much smarter than her husband, and here she is stuck with this guy that is not accomplishing what she had hoped he would. So this sets up
And it's
Rose.
the same with Julia. Julia
And
is,
by the way, this is the point. Yeah, it's exactly right. That's what's really a weird part of, an amazing part of the story. Okay.
it
So now
repeats itself.
Rose has asked one thing of her children, of these girls. What does she say to them? Whatever you do,
Don't get pregnant.
yes, don't get pregnant. Get your education and don't get pregnant. And then what happens?
the
Gets
gets pregnant. One gets pregnant.
Celia goes ahead and
And gets
gets herself
pregnant.
pregnant.
Yeah.
And not only that, Cecilia will not do what her mother did. She will not get married to the guy. In fact, she won't even identify him. So the mother, who's a devout Catholic, remember that whole thing? She has the saints all over the dining room wall. The mother is distraught and very angry at Cecilia. And she's so mad at Cecilia that what does she do?
Kicks
Kicks
her
her
out.
out.
Cuts her off, kicks her out.
Mhm.
Exactly. Right. Which is so ironic. Why? Yeah, Linda.
That's what I was going to ask. Did anybody feel like, didn't she learn anything?
By the way, the author says it's a very interesting thing about that. And we're going to see this throughout the story. Very often, children reenact what they've seen at home. And
Abusers
Rose,
abuse.
yeah, right. That's right. Rose cut off her mother. Her mother cut off Rose. Rose is now cutting off Cecilia. And by the way, where else do we see that later on in the story? Who does the same thing?
Alice.
Julia.
When William cuts off Alice.
William cuts off Alice.
Alice,
We're gonna
okay.
see this
So
time
Julia's,
it's this crazy cycle. This cycle. So not only won't she see Cecilia, she cuts off Cecilia, but she will not even meet Izzy, right? So Julia, and we're going to talk about Julia in greater depth in a moment, but just for now, Julia wants to fix things. So Julia decides she's going to try to fix things, and she tries to get her mother together with Cecilia, but it doesn't happen. And it doesn't happen because of something Linda brought up in the very beginning. Cecilia gives birth. Mother has cut off Cecilia, tells Charlie, we're never seeing this child. And what does Charlie do?
Linda said he
Goes by
goes.
himself.
Goes by himself, goes into the hospital, and he sees the baby. And what does he say to that baby?
Hello, beautiful.
beautiful.
And he thanks Cecilia for having this wonderful child. And then he proceeds to walk down the hallway and
Goodbye.
that's goodbye, goodbye, Charlie. Exactly. Okay. So it's this repeated theme of what parents do and children reenact very often. But what's really sad about it is that in Rose's mind, not only is it worth cutting off Cecilia because she got pregnant, but also because she caused the death of her father. So in Rose's mind, this is how it stands. So look, you can tell this is not going to get fixed very easily. Now I want to talk about Charlie. Charlie is a big disappointment to his wife. He doesn't have the ambition. What else about him?
But Charlie has unconditional love, and Rose had conditional love.
Ah,
And
that's right.
a very big difference between the two of parents.
Huge difference. And the girls note that difference. They really know that difference. The problem with Charlie is he's alcoholic also, right? He's drunk a lot of the time. So, and he doesn't show up very often for things. But when he's there, Sherry, like you say, he had unconditional love. And what I thought was really special about that guy is that when he said, hello, beautiful, what was he saying really to each of these girls?
I see you.
I see you. I see your inner beauty. And that's what he's referring to.
And I love you.
And I love you. And I love you. Exactly. And they saw that.
Linda?
Yeah.
I don't know if you're going to bring it up. I don't want to steal your thunder. I'm sure you're going to bring up Little Women. Do you have, are you going to talk about Charlie's place in Little Women?
Go for it. And then I'll tell you a little bit about
Okay, because I didn't realize it. You know, we'll talk about that theme. But, and I didn't know that. Charlie, excuse me, resembles the father of the Little Women because he was, you know, when Charlie quoted Walt Whitman, that's something that the Little Women's father did. He was, let me read it. It was a nod to, his name was Bronson Alcott, and he was part of the transcendental, the real father was part of transcendentalism. He followed the movement. And like Charlie, he was a dreamer. He was impractical. He wasn't reliable. So he had those characteristics like the women, you know, all our women in Hello Beautiful as they did the girls in Little Women. And I found that very interesting.
Very
That
interesting.
he
And by the way,
brought them in.
that was actually Louisa May Alcott's father. That
Right.
was based on that. But what is really funny about this, in one of the interviews I saw, somebody said, "Oh, wow, you did an amazing job making the correlation, because the girls were always fighting over which of the March girls were they." And remember, it was Sylvie and Joe that were arguing. Sylvie and Julia that were arguing. They were Joe. The one that was sickly and died was Beth, and the others were saying who they were Beth when they were sad, whatever it was. So somebody said to the author, "You must have really loved Little Women." She said, "You know what was funny? I never expected this to be an homage to Little Women." She said, "I actually didn't realize till I was writing the characters, and as the book progressed, the similarities to Little Women." So that was later. But she did love Walt Whitman. In fact, it was cute in one of the interviews. She said, "I love Walt Whitman. I had so many pages of Walt Whitman in my original text that my editor went crazy pulling out all those pages because it was too much Walt Whitman." So yeah, it's interesting when you read that. Okay, so here we have Charlie. He's this really good guy. He sees all of these kids, these girls, and he's also the kind of guy that sees beauty in everything. He says he sees beauty in the blue sky. And when he asks William, William first comes to dinner, "So what do you do for a living? What are you going to do?" Everybody is stunned that he would ask, because he used to always say, "Don't ask people their work. It's not a job that makes a person." And Emmeline, when she was a little girl, said, "Daddy, if it's not a job that makes a person, what makes you, Daddy?" And he answered, because he hated his job. And he answered, "Your smile, the blue sky." And Julia used to hear this, and I could just picture her, or see, how like our kids always roll their eyes. Well,
Mhm.
Julia really couldn't stand it, because to her, quote, "It's all nonsense and it's useless to Mom. She's the one who has to do a stranger's laundry every week to pay the bills." So you see, Julia's character, she's much more pragmatic. The dad is filled with beauty and love and unconditional and all that. Guess what? In the end, it doesn't pay the bills, according to Julia and according to Rose. So speaking of Julia, what do we want to say about her? She's pragmatic. What else?
Kind of
Yes,
controlling.
strong-willed.
Controlling. Oh
Yeah,
my,
strong-willed.
controlling.
She's Rose.
Strong-willed, yeah. Domineering.
Yes,
Tries to
Domineering.
control, she tries to control everybody and predict what they should do and not do. Yeah.
She's a planner. She projects everything. Exactly. She can't stand that her father likes poetry, and she's so happy when William comes over and he doesn't like poetry, because she's made one decision. She likes William because William seems like he comes from a nice family. She doesn't know anything about the parents or anything. She just sees that they grew up in a nice house. He had his own bedroom. The father was an accountant. She finds out. She thinks, "Oh my God, I'm going to marry a professional. I'm going to make him a professional." The father says, "What are you going to be at the end of college? What do you want?" And he hesitates. And she says she likes that he doesn't have an answer. She answers, and what does she say? What's he going to do?
Be a professor.
Going to
Is
be
he-
a professor, right?
Yeah.
She
But
answered
that's what she likes, that he's malleable to her whims.
exactly.
Right.
I love this line. He doesn't give an answer. He hesitates, and she loves that he hesitated. Quote, "He lacks answers." And a shiver of pleasure climbed up her spine, because Julia specialized in answers. He didn't have the
She was
answer.
a firstborn.
Okay, she was a firstborn. Okay, cute. Okay, she had all the answers. And she finds out that his parents aren't coming to the wedding, that he was unloved. And in the beginning, she says to herself, "You know what? It's fine. I am going to fill that absence. I am going to just love him enough that he won't even remember his childhood." That she goes into it with that feeling. So here he is. He has hurt his knee. He is devastated that he is no longer going to be able to have this dream of becoming a basketball star. And she decides they're going to get married, and she decides he's going to become a professor. And so she says to him, "Don't be so worried about your knee and basketball. We've got a wedding coming up." So what do you see with her? Not only is she controlling and domineering and manipulative, what else?
She doesn't see other people.
she's tone deaf,
Yeah.
right? She doesn't see other people. She is tone deaf to him, certainly.
She has all these expectations
All
for
the
her, for other people, including herself. And
Yes, she was the kind of person that said
Yes,
she believed that direct actions brought good consequences. So if you got an education,
right,
if you married right, and if you got enough money and you had enough, you have the right amount of children, you just had a wonderful life. So she was a planner, right? And she
But
planned
Linda,
Yeah.
that was also the downfall. If you didn't meet her expectations, or you didn't want to do what she wanted to do, that was the line that she cut you off.
That's
You
exactly
know,
right.
that's the stubbornness that came out of her. I'm right, you're wrong. You don't do it my way.
My way is the right way. Yeah.
manipulative. Kind
Oh,
of, that's very manipulative.
So she has this whole future and she has no idea that he loves
Sure.
basketball. She has no idea that later on he's going to get involved with the coach and be embedded with the basketball team. She doesn't know. He doesn't share it with her because he knows she's not interested in that. And she loves that he's writing a book. She thinks, oh my God, that's so great. He's going to be important. It's just all wonderful. So here she's this, well, with all that planning, what went wrong? Lynda, you just hit it on the head. She didn't meet his expectations. He didn't do what she wanted. What else went wrong? What else went
Everything.
wrong? Everything.
Getting more
Remember, he
depressed.
wasn't writing a book. It was his
He
journal.
wasn't writing a book.
Right,
He was
right.
keeping a journal. He was keeping a journal. And what else?
And getting depressed. I think he was
And
getting more
depressed, more and more
as-
depressed. It's starting a downward spiral, and she doesn't realize it because she doesn't know how he feels about the loss of his career dream, and she doesn't get it. And she reads the journal, and what does she get out of the journal? Nothing, right?
Nothing.
Darn?
Her
She doesn't
sister
get it.
does. Her sister grabs it and gets the insights in there. Yeah.
But the other thing that happens to William is that she makes a decision because of Cecilia. She's angry at Cecilia. Why?
Celia had the baby first.
Baby
She
first.
got first.
Baby
Yeah,
first before she could get pregnant.
It
Yeah.
was out of order. It was
Yeah.
out of order. So she's
Well,
angry about
She
that.
should have been first. Yes.
She's
first
going to
the
rectify
oldest.
it, and she says to William, "Okay, guess what? We're getting pregnant. We're going to have a baby." And he says, "What? We're not ready. I'm not even out of graduate school. She doesn't want to hear about that. She goes
Right.
ahead and she gets herself pregnant, right? And she's angry because when Charlie died, he takes a leave of absence. She thinks it makes him look soft and lazy. She doesn't understand the journal. She gives the journal to Sylvie to read. And what's starting to really hit her is that William is a lot like
Her
But he's
father.
not-
father.
But he's not a lot like Charlie. She was misinterpreting his his behaviors. Because she had no emotional intelligence, she couldn't see what was going on with him. He doesn't know how to be a parent. He had no role model of parenting. Zero.
She
So
has
she
no idea of what's causing it, but the behaviors that she's seeing, it's
She's
just what
attributing.
Rose saw in Charlie. A lack of ambition, not living up to your potential. She doesn't know where it's coming. You know, she doesn't even give thought to it. As you say, she doesn't have the EQ to even ask the questions of why is this happening? Okay, so all of a sudden we see where he's in this downward spiral. She's unaware of it. And there's something else that's really interesting because as he's in this downward spiral, what happens to Julia at the same time? Picturing one member of the couple is going this way down. Julia gives birth to Alice. And how does she feel after she has her baby girl? After she gives birth to Alice, she realizes, you know what? I have tried to fix everything and it really hasn't worked. I tried to keep, I had no, I couldn't keep my father alive. I couldn't keep my mother in Chicago. She packed up and moved to Florida. I couldn't keep Cecilia, my sister, celibate. I couldn't keep William ambitious. Quote, She'd been fine-tuning her skills for now, for what mattered, for motherhood. She would protect and celebrate her baby girl and let everyone else do whatever they wanted. With her daughter, Julia was complete. So now she's Julia, the mother. She is replacing Rose, the cornerstone, right? She's now the mother. Alice is the daughter. And when William comes to see the baby for the first time, his child, she says, the author describes, she's very excited for him to see the baby girl she'd made.
Mhm.
Right, speaks volumes, right?
He included. He's
Right, exactly. It's like she's got this power now. She's got all these plans for the she's going to do, how she herself is going to get a job with Professor Cooper. She's really going to be successful. And all of a sudden, she now is a powerhouse. And all of a sudden, Julius goes from loving the fact that he was always indecisive, always dependent on her, and all of a sudden, she is frustrated. Why? All
He's
of a
not
sudden,
stepping up.
he's so dependent.
Right. He's not stepping up. And so that
He is
irritates
not stepping up. Exactly. In fact, she can't stand the fact that he's not stepping up and the fact that he's still asking her advice. And finally, she's, I can't give you every single answer to the universe. I'm busy with the baby and I don't have time to take care of 2 children. And she's so frustrated with him. Okay. So now we've got poor William. He realizes, number one, that she sees his weaknesses. She has seen, remember in the journal, he had the footnotes. The footnotes were like, this is terrible. I'm terrible. I'm doing a terrible job. I can't do anything right. Who am I? What am I doing? Who am I? Who am I? All over the paper. Who am I? So he's really struggling. She doesn't see that as a cry for help. She sees it more as a weakness, right?
Mhm.
So he knows that in his wife's eyes, he is a failure. In addition, what else is going on with him?
the fear of parenting.
The fear of parenting. He is frightened. He didn't want this baby. He's frightened of being a parent. What else?
Well,
How
he's
about-
also disturbed that she shared it with her sister,
Oh,
the
she's
manuscript.
by the way, you should also know at this point in time when Rose picked up to move to Florida, Sylvie had nowhere to go. So Sylvie moves in with them. Do you remember? She's sleeping on the couch now. So Sylvie is sleeping on the couch. And sometimes he would come in and see that his wife in the middle of the night had gotten out of bed and was sleeping in Sylvie's arms on the couch. And a lot of times he just felt like they belonged together and he felt like the intruder, right?
Right.
And plus, he's a teaching assistant. How's he doing at work? He doesn't feel good about that either, right? He's doing terribly at work and he's got such anxiety over it. So he's in denial, with this baby and the journal. And it's just basketball is a big disaster for him. As she was becoming more visibly pregnant and ultimately gives birth, he was becoming less of the man she'd married. One time, Julia says to him, I feel like I'm having the baby with Sylvia, and you're just some guy who lives here. So you see where this guy is coming from. Everything is all of a sudden happening to him, except for one night, he's out and he sees a person on a bench, and he sits down next to the person, and who is it? It's Sylvie.
That's right.
It's
Sylvie.
Sylvie. Do you remember,
Sylvie.
Lainey,
Right.
I just saw you say
Yeah.
it's Sylvie. What you
Yeah.
end up seeing is that all of a sudden they have a talk, and this was a
Connection.
very pivotal scene in the
Yeah.
book. Why? Why was it so important?
There's a connection. a
They
flow
connected.
connection. Yeah,
They connected.
Seemed to understand him.
yeah.
She understood him exactly. And what's
Connection.
interesting is that she recognized certain things in him and he recognized things in her. At one point, he says to her, I could see how you're feeling. And she says that he saw the loss. Everybody else in the family, the mother moved to Florida, everybody else went on with their lives, but she was still feeling the loss so desperately of her father. And he recognized that. At the same time, she had read those footnotes. She's embarrassed that she's actually seen his weakness, knows how he's struggling, right? So he even used words when they're talking together about the stars and whatever else, all this stuff that, she starts to see the similarities between the two of them. And it ends up being a very poignant scene. After that, on another day, I guess he goes out and he
Too close
goes
to
to
the-
his classes. And the next thing is that he's exhausted. He's been getting up now with his new baby only because the crying wakes him. And he sits down at another park bench, and this time he's next to an old professor. Remember this scene? And the professor, he falls asleep in the middle of the afternoon. And when he wakes up, the professor's already gone. But he realizes to his horror, what has he done?
He missed the class. He didn't.
He slept through the class.
Yeah.
He's thinking, no teacher ever sleeps through a class. How could that be? And it's, again, this downward spiral. And the next thing is he starts to lie to Julia. He makes up stories. Really, he's going to the basketball team and he's working with them. He makes it sound like, oh yeah, I taught this class. I had lunch with this guy. In fact, he's lying all the time. And he's starting to realize that he really can't continue to pretend that he is a husband to her. And ultimately, what does he do?
He attempts suicide.
Sorry.
Doesn't show up and he attempts, doesn't he go into the lake?
He
Yeah.
wasn't late.
Right.
Yeah.
Doesn't he?
He gives her a note. And in the note, he says, listen, you deserve better. I can't be who you want me to be. And he gives her the $10,000 check that they never cashed. He never gave her for the wedding. And with that, he's done with her. Exactly. And he walks into the lake and he tries to commit suicide. What did you make of his decision to give up his daughter? Well, why did he do it? What do you think?
He
I
thought
just
that
think-
he would do damage to the daughter because he never experienced his own childhood. That's my opinion.
Yeah, he had no role model. He right. He thought he would damage her. What
He
else?
thought it was the best thing for the child.
He thought it was the best thing.
So
for
in
the
his heart, he thought he was actually doing
the
the
right
best thing, not understanding that his own loss of his parents is what caused all of his problems.
Right.
And that even though Charlie was a broken dad, broken by whose determination, he was still a good dad.
Right.
So he didn't know that he could emulate more of a Charlie figure and be there for Allison just to love her. He had no role model. He had Charlie as a role model, but he wasn't in Charlie's life long enough.
not long enough. Yeah.
Yeah.
He felt
He
such
liked Charlie.
a disappointment.
Carol, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, he felt like such a disappointment that there was no use staying around.
Such a disappointment to everybody, to his advisor, to his wife. It was to everybody. Lynda, what were you saying?
Well, first of all, I was going to say, William really liked Charlie.
Oh, he loved Charlie. Yeah.
And so I don't think that was, thing. He just saw himself as a failure at everything. And that would be a downer for his new daughter, that he couldn't do that right. He couldn't do anything right. And I don't see that he looked back and say, look at what my parents did to me. He was in the here and now, at least, in my opinion, and I will not be able to do right by her. I think being with Julia would be the best thing. And maybe he doesn't acknowledge it at that point, but at the end of the book, he felt a loss, that he wanted to be in his daughter's life. And I really think that he was just such a poor soul. He was just battered down by everything. Julia said, you're not the husband I wanted to be, but yes, he was. He was exactly what she wanted to be. No opinion, malleable, all the things she wanted.
And the fact that she changed.
He was.
Yeah.
And which, she was terrible for him.
Yeah.
And he just couldn't get up until the people who believed in him, like Sylvia and Kent, that he could, rise up and say, I'm worth something.
Right. The author says it so beautifully. She says, everything had been getting darker for him before Alice was born. In other words, the depression was there.
Was there.
Yeah.
But once Alice came, she was like a lamp, a light so bright he could not really look at her. He was afraid to touch her. Remember, he didn't hold
Yeah, he
her,
was.
right? He was afraid to touch her, that his darkness would overtake her bright light, that his darkness would swamp her light. So he felt he had to stay away from her to keep her safe.
Yes.
So sad, right? Right? And to your point, Lynda, I think Alice would be better off if her universe was filled with Julia's light and none of his darkness. So he's willing to give her up to Julia, and he doesn't realize, of course, that he's doing the exact same thing that his parents did. This whole idea of cutting him off,
Abandoning.
and of course,
Except that his parents were around and ruined his life. And I think in his mind, he wasn't going to be around to ruin her life. He wasn't going to be the dark person with no face. And that to him made a difference, not taking the light off of her face by seeing his face with no light.
actually, I think there's one line in there that says he didn't realize that just that you're physically not around doesn't, it doesn't say it's emotional cutoff is the point. Yeah.
Right.
So Julia can't understand how William can give up their daughter, but she immediately runs to the lawyer and she makes sure he doesn't change his mind and she cashes the check. And of course, we know she goes off to New York and becomes quite successful. What's interesting is that when Sylvie calls her and says, listen, this is what happened. He walked into the lake. He attempted suicide. What's her reaction? Does she come to the hospital? She does not.
Oh.
And she's angry at Sylvie. What are you worried about, William? I'm your sister. He left me. Come, I need you. Come to me. And in fact, Sylvie makes the decision to stay with him. In fact, she says that she's the wife so that she can talk to the doctor. So what do you make of the fact that Sylvie made that decision? Why did she make the decision in the very beginning of his illness? Why did she make the decision to stay at the hospital?
She had feelings for him.
She had feelings for him. Yeah.
Yes.
Also,
She saw his need.
She saw his need. That was, I think, what it was. She read those footnotes. She saw how vulnerable he was. He had no one. And she wanted to be there for him. Yeah. Lynda?
I agree with those things, but I think she disliked the way her sister was treating him. How could you see your husband who is so depressed and you treat him like this with no caring, not going to the hospital? Well, how could she go to that sister? Because that sister was totally selfish and self-centered. So she didn't see that she was making a choice. She wasn't giving up Julia in her mind. She was going to the person who was so needy and had no one. So I don't think it was just so easy to make the decision.
Yeah.
Lynda, correct me if I'm wrong.
Which-
Sylvie did speak with Julia when she read the footnotes.
Oh, yeah.
Oh yeah.
So she even was trying to get Julia to see his neediness,
His sickness.
his
Yeah,
sickness.
I don't think she shared with Julia everything that she saw in those footnotes. I don't think she did. I don't think she did share that. I don't think so. But she realized when she read those footnotes to herself, she realized that her sister made a mistake. She did realize that he had a lot of the same qualities that Sylvie had, the same struggles. And also Sylvie always saw herself the most like Charlie. She did. She always saw herself as a dreamer, more like Charlie. And in fact, now all of a sudden she's realizing this guy is a lot like Charlie in that he sees the beauty of things, but he's got his own struggles going on. It's interesting about how does she feel about Julia, because later we know that she's feeling a certain angst that Julia isn't coming. But the truth of the matter is, we know that Julia was just worried that if he got better, that she'd have to stay married to him. We know that. Julia was just glad to sort of be done with him. And later, she admits that to Sylvie when they finally get together after the big rift. Let's talk about Sylvie because she's an interesting person. I love the story. They made it like where she likes to kiss the boys in the library stacks. She was practicing for her great one love, right? Practicing for her great one love. So she was a funny character. Here, this is a bookworm, and yet she liked to kiss these boys. But what I thought was interesting was how her father says to her at one point that he's like her. And her father was not really a rule follower. He couldn't really do his job because he wasn't one to really listen to the boss. And he excused the fact when Sylvie got in trouble at school, she would cut her classes and go read in the park. And the father understood her. She just wasn't one of these rule followers. And so I love the line where she says, if there were two doors, I'm trying to find the thing. It sounds like if there were two doors, one was being a girlfriend / wife, mother, and the second door was sluttiness, she would find a third door. And that was sort of Charlie. He was kind of the guy that always found the third door. And that's sort of what she was always looking for. So she's now drawn to William. But what is it exactly that she's seeing in William? And why is she drawn to him? Well, she sees all the same struggles that she herself is feeling, right? When she reads his footnotes, she knows he's struggling with who he is. And her father had once said to her, we look out the window, or sometimes we just look into ourselves, but we're always looking for something more. And she realizes that William has been looking into himself, and what's reflected back is a lot of uncertainty. She realizes that when William looks in the mirror, he probably doesn't even recognize or see himself. And Sylvie realizes a lot of times when she was with her mother, getting back into the conditional love, when she was with her mother, she felt like she was disappearing. Her mother never saw her. Her mother never saw who she was. She realizes that her brother-in-law, that William, had been feeling this forever, the idea that people didn't see him. And it's interesting that when you listen to interviews with the author, one of the things she wants to talk about is the idea of being seen, how important it is, whether it's with our children, with our spouse, with our partner, whatever it is, with our friends, the idea of being seen, who we are. So what do we mean by being seen? Sylvie feels, and William in the end, they feel like they're being seen by one another. What do we mean by that? What does it mean?
Sylvia felt
Empathy for one
seen
another.
by her father.
Okay, she was seen by her father.
Her father.
And when he said, hello, beautiful, he saw her. He
Right.
was.
And that was a big loss because when he died, there was no one else that saw her until William and her developed a deeper relationship.
To your point, Sherry, to your point, since Charlie's death, she had felt like she was spilling out of her edges, trying to scoop herself up at the same time. Her sisters and her mother were safe. They had their aspirations. They had their routines. Sylvie was all heartbreak and loss. She and her brother-in-law were both struggling to inhabit their own skin, a goal that would sound absurd to almost anyone else. So they recognized in each other this struggle that they were having. And of course, after the talk on the park bench that night, they both saw the true state that the other was in. And of course, if you remember, after that park bench, she realized how she felt about him, that she was starting to be drawn to him. And so, being a good sister, she realizes this is not good. I'm drawn to my sister's husband. And she moves out of the apartment at that time. And she has to sleep at other places because she knows she can't spend any more time with him. But of course, she feels very lost. She says, with William, she felt she was seen. And it was without judgment or expectation that he saw her, and in that space, Sylvie felt potential for bravery, brilliance, kindness, and joy because she was being seen. Her father's love had said to her, do everything, be everything. And she knew when she was with William that she had that capacity. All these sails had been on her ship's deck, but she hadn't seen them before William. Since being in that hospital room, she now had the capacity to raise these giant, beautiful sails and go. So you see that all of a sudden, her father told her she had this potential. She never really believed it. All of a sudden, she's with William. He sort of picks up where her father left off, and she feels like, with William, with no judgment, she can reach some potential. But the idea of being seen is the idea, the author says, of someone recognizing who you are and recognizing your potential and accepting you for who you are and not who you want them to be, right?
And bringing the best in that person.
Yeah,
He brought out
the best.
And not wanting you to change.
And not what? Say it again.
Not wanting you to change.
And not, that's right. Accepting
Right.
you as you are. Exactly. Okay,
The
so
unconditional
Sylvie,
love.
we know that
Yeah.
Sylvie is writing a book. And what is she putting in her book?
who's writing them?
Her
Family
memories.
stories for family history, family
All her
stories
family
about
stories.
each kid. Yeah, what happened to them?
When
Yeah.
Charlie was alive, how wonderful it was with the sisters. And every other paragraph
Communication, yeah,
has to do with Charlie, or it has to do
Yeah.
with Julia. She's
Yeah.
missing this link with Julia, right? Because Julia has, of course, pulled away, and she felt so bad about it. But William was the one. She knew that great love would come to her, and of course, she felt sick that it was with William, but she had to go for it. Lynda, yeah.
I don't know what time you have to end, so I have to ask this question. Why do you think Julia wouldn't tell anyone that she was visiting her sister when she was sick?
Okay, why did they want to keep that a secret? First of all, were you surprised when Julia showed up? No,
No.
no.
Well,
She was so strong with William. When she called her with William, she said, no, absolutely not. And then she shows up. So
Deep
why
down
did they
conscious,
keep it a
yeah.
secret?
He called her.
He called her. He
oh,
ended
he
up
called
calling her.
Julia. Yeah.
He ends up calling her, and she says, no, I don't care that I'm sad that Sylvie's dying, but I'm not coming. And then, of course, she herself never intends to go. In fact, she's on her way to work. She just has her purse with her, and she doesn't have a suitcase. She gets on a plane and she comes, right? And she never, she didn't intend to come. But they keep it a secret. And it's interesting because when they keep it a secret, do you remember when she and William first got together, Sylvie and William? They kept it a secret.
Mhm.
And there was something very special and very sweet about keeping it a secret, just the two of them.
But
So-
that was understandable. Because
Right.
that really was taboo, taboo that they were together.
Yeah.
I think Julia kept it a secret because she might think that other people would think she was weak. It was a weakness in her that she would see her sister, but everybody would think of it as a strength, not a weakness.
Yeah,
But
She
she
had
might
a-
have wanted Sylvie
but
just
she's
for
such a
herself.
but she also had such a close bond with her sister, more than with the twins. There was something there between the two of
They
them
did,
for so
the
long.
two older ones.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find my notes because I wanted to go remember it because it's such a good question. I actually asked it to myself also. They had a very special meeting, and I think she was able to confide Julia in her. One of the things she confides to her at their first meeting is that she sort of says to Sylvie, listen, I got to tell you something. I was actually happy that you went to the hospital, because if you hadn't gone to the hospital, they would have made me come. And by your going, I was able to get away. So that's the first thing she shares with Sylvie. That was a confidence. The second thing, and I'm trying to find it in my notes, she says to Sylvie, that's when she admits to her, you know what? I don't know if it was at the first meeting or the second. Oh, it was at the first meeting, I think. She admits that she has really messed up Alice. She says, you know what? Alice has grown up, and I she doesn't use these words, but she was smothered. She was so trying to keep this girl safe, and she didn't want to tell. Remember, the little girl Alice is saying, "Mommy, I have nobody. I don't feel safe." She didn't feel safe and secure. And the contrast, by the way, of Alice is the other cousin who's raised by Cecilia, Izzy,
Izzy.
who goes back and forth between the super duplex of all these aunts and doesn't know which bed she's going to sleep in that night. It could have been any of the bedrooms. So you see that she is a different person entirely, right? She's got this open heart. When Alice finally calls at the end and is in town, she says to Alice, "Oh my God, come over right away." She's been waiting for this cousin, right? So she's open-hearted. Here's Alice. Alice is like, as a matter of fact, the author says that Eleanor, Alice's demeanor was she always was, everything in her life was small, so uneventful. It was like a cat who refused to leave its cardboard box. She had a very safe job. She was a copy editor. She never wanted to move up. She never wanted promotions. She never traveled. You know what I mean? She had felt this very small world. The other thing I loved, Lynda, is that 10 days later, Julia visited again. And again, nobody knows, right? And they go to the movie theater. And they're sitting in the movie theater. And she decides, by the way, she's going to tell William the next week. She's going to tell him that they're together. Of course, we know that she doesn't make it the next week. But in the movie theater, they were ageless, 10 and 13 again. And Sylvie thought to herself, this time with Julia was worth dying for. Very special. I actually teared up when I read that line. It was so beautiful. It was such a special time for the two of them that I think they really just wanted to cherish it that way. And I think had she not died when she did, the plan would have been to tell everybody, but they had this very sweet reconciliation. I want to ask you, do you think that Julia responded appropriately when she found out? I love the way Emmeline is the one who is forced into being the one to tell her sister, Julia, about William and Sylvie. And Emmeline starts the conversation by saying, listen, do you agree, Julia, that we don't choose who we love? And why is Emmeline the perfect person to talk about that? Because what was Emmeline?
She was gay.
Right, Carol,
yeah.
right. Exactly. She was gay. She had chosen Josie to be her love of her life. So, and of course, Julia says, I agree with you. She says, okay, well, now I got to tell you, William and Sylvie are together. And she says, well, that wasn't a choice. That was just a bitter, awful, brutal betrayal.
Yeah.
And that's how she looks at it. It's a betrayal.
I wonder if Julia did she ever really love him? It was just a matter of convenience. She wanted to get on with her life. She wanted someone, as we already talked about, to manipulate and to form in what she wanted, but it had nothing really to do with him.
So something, Lainey, I thought about that, but then when I reread it the second time for you guys, I think she did love him. The person she was then, thinking who he was, totally misreading him. I think she loved that person. He didn't turn out to be the person she wanted to create. And she ended up changing also. So whereas he changed in a bad way, let's say downward spiral, she changed in a powerful way. They didn't change together. And she really never saw him totally. But in the beginning, she really does think that she loves this person that she can create.
She
Right?
loved the idea of him.
She loved
Exactly.
the idea of him.
That's what
it.
I
She loved
meant.
it.
She didn't really love him. She loved the image that she had.
Certainly not as he was. So she feels like a victim. I think she's embarrassed. She was happy to go to New York to avoid the gossip. But it's interesting that within a couple of years, she is very satisfied with her life, Julia. She is, she's got this wonderful daughter that she's now protecting and has made her whole life. She's got a great sex life. That's what she describes. And she also is running the New York office of this professor. And she's sending her family postcards because she doesn't really want to have a relationship with them. So she's living her life, what she thinks is her best life. Her father used to call her, remember the nickname for Julia? A rocket.
Oh, yeah.
But what I loved about Charlie, by the way, when we talk about he was able to see his kids, he called her the rocket. He knew this was a girl that had power. She was a powerhouse. She was going to fly, right? He knew that. With Sylvie, he saw more of himself, so he really saw their strengths and he saw their weaknesses as well, as he really knew his kids. So do you think that Sylvie did betray Julia?
No.
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 Do you think it could have been any other way? I was trying to think of it. Was there any other way that Julia could have taken it other than to remove herself? Lynda, you're muted. Go ahead.
I do think she was betrayed. That's where I was going last time. I just think it wasn't a good thing to do to your sister. It was like when you were in college, you didn't date your roommate's, boyfriend after she
But she
broke.
waited till they were
but-
separated.
But other than the fact, maybe she helped save him indirectly. Maybe he, without her help,
I
he
believe
wouldn't have
she
made
did.
it. Yeah.
She could have
So,
been
I mean, that's the other way you can look at it. Okay.
Darlene, that's absolutely
Yeah.
Sylvie saved him. And as a matter of fact,
Yeah, I agree.
if you remember, he realizes that what he didn't get from his parents, he finally got from Sylvie. She allowed him, she opened up the floodgates for him of what it is to feel loved and to understand the concept of being able to give love. He didn't have any of that from his childhood. She was the first experience of that. And I kind of felt like you did, Lynda, about the betrayal in the beginning, because I do have two sisters or three sisters. But on the other hand, as one of her friends points out, you know what? You guys never got anything together at all until they were discarding each other.
Exactly.
He had virtually discarded him by moving off and giving up on him.
Right.
And yeah.
Sister, though, what about if she had gone to her sister and told her? Like a phone call, prepared her, not have somebody else tell her, but said, ordinarily, I wouldn't have gone after,
Yeah.
hooked, but we found each other, we were both unhappy, we were miserable, that kind of thing. And it just happened. She might not have liked it, but she wouldn't have
I
felt
agree with
betrayed.
Linda. I agree
Huh?
with you. I don't think it was a betrayal, but I agree with you. She should have been confident enough to say, since you didn't come and I was nursing him back to health, now we have feelings. And so I
Exactly.
agree with you, but I don't think she betrayed the sister, but I agree with you. She should have been honest.
Well, yeah,
But Julia felt betrayed.
I think she could have, but that's what I was thinking too. I think she could, but Julia's reaction still might have been the same, which is, you know what, I've had it with both of you, because she felt these were the two people closest to her sister, with whom, as Darlene points out, they had a special bond, the two older sisters, right? So, and who she was married to, the two of them, the people she was closest to, ended up betraying her. So in her mind, I don't know whether it would have helped, but I felt the same way, that perhaps it could have been lessened. The blow could have been lessened, but they were afraid to tell her. They held off telling her. I think it was for a year or something like that, Okay. So what is Sylvie's reaction when she finds out that she's sick, when she gets her diagnosis? I love the fact that she grew up a good Catholic girl. So what's her first thought? Retribution. Sylvie had betrayed her sister, so her body had betrayed itself. In her mind, she grew up with this good Catholic mother, all the saints on the wall.
Right.
This is how she's feeling. But she's not worried about herself. Who's she worried about?
William.
William, because she knows how fragile this guy is, right? And that he's never had anybody else open their heart to him, and she's it. and this is all he's got, and she's very worried about that. The beauty is that she's written this book with memories, and so Sylvie is very worried. Okay, so now Sylvie has passed away. What does her death actually accomplish in the story? By the way, you should know, in one of the interviews with the author, she said, listen, I had to figure out, she said, in the very beginning, I knew I needed to put this scene in. She said, because I realized when I created this big rift with these very close sisters, it would take an equally catastrophic situation to bring them back together again. And so it was, in this case, a death. And so what does, when Sylvie dies, what is accomplished?
It brings them together.
Brings them together. How so?
Individually, well, Alice came first, and then the mothers.
daughter-
They're all,
the
they're all
daughter
gonna
daughter
find their
met
link.
Izzy,
Yeah.
you know,
Izzy,
everybody got
finding
back
her family she
together.
never knew. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like the father died and everybody dispersed, and Sylvie died and it brought everybody back.
Good. Yeah. Yeah.
And by the way, just adding to your point, what's interesting is the author, when you think about it, she makes it so that, how does it work? Cecilia's baby, Izzy, is born, and what happens? Charlie dies at the same time. Circle of life, okay? Okay, the next thing is, I forget what the detail was, but Rose left for Florida, and something else happened. And then, of course, this time, it's Sylvie dying and Alice coming back into the family. So what I loved about this concept of the circle of life, one of the interviewers asked the author about this, and the author said, you know, she didn't remember who came up with this quote, but I loved it. And the quote is, that's really what life is about. It's about a series of departures and arrivals. And I love that, the idea of arrivals and departures. And that really is what the circle of life is, right? So that's what happens. What I think was very beautiful about this ending is that before she dies, she does see William looking at the mural. And if you remember, he's looking at one of Cecilia's murals. And what's in that mural? What is there?
His daughter,
His sister. His
See,
sister.
all of a sudden, that Cecilia on her own. It's like a little school class picture.
Little redhead.
There's a little redheaded girl. There's another girl who looks exactly like William.
And Alice.
So you see, we've got Caroline, the sister, we've got Alice, and we've got Izzy, and we've got all these sisters. And she sees William looking at that, and she realizes, you know what, there's hope. That in fact, maybe there is that door that could open. I loved also that when Julia comes in, she realizes that with her sister, she really had felt more alive, that she had been a rocket in New York, but to really be a fulfilled rocket, she really had to have her sisters with her. She had to have that love from them. And the other thing I think is beautiful, Sylvie, who does she give that book to, of the Book of Memories? She gives it to. She gives it to
Alice,
Yeah.
because Alice has been left out of all of it.
Yes, and so she's
didn't
able
know
to
anything
bring
about-
Alice up to date with everything. You know, she really is able to teach her everything. She wants them to see how the family had loved each other, and what this family could be like if everybody was together. Okay, I love this part. Okay, so those of us that have grandchildren could just picture this. So Izzy is so excited now, Cecilia's daughter, to meet her cousin Alice, right? So Alice comes. I love this. Listen to this. Izzy is filling Alice in now about Rose, their grandmother, right? So she says, she stopped talking to my mom, right? She's saying Cecilia, she stopped talking to my mom when she got pregnant with me. She's never even acknowledged that I exist. She got mad at Aunt Emmeline for being gay. She was mad at Sylvie for marrying your dad. And she used to be mad at your mother for getting divorced. But then Cecilia said, Grandma's going to pretend like we've been a big, happy family the whole time, and I think we should go along with it. How cute is
Oh,
that?
that's funny.
Grandma's going to. And you know what? There's another paragraph which I should have starred for you because I loved it. It's Rose. Rose comes back with them. She's reflecting on her family. She says, like, about these wonderful kids that she has. She goes, oh, like, you know, one daughter who's a lesbian, another daughter who's divorced, another daughter who goes with the husband of the other daughter. And like, she's trying, but the way it's written is really cute. You could just picture Rose with all of this stuff going on around her, you know, how she's looking at it. The other thing is that it's a lovely scene at the very end. So they're at the house, right, at that super duplex, and Sylvie has died, and the family is there. They're discussing all of the arrangements, I assume. And Sylvie has left for her this gift. What's beautiful is that Sylvie is not present, but she's able to be part of this by giving this gift to Alice. Of what the family had been like. And William, what the family says, they're all in the house, and William goes out to the garden, if you remember at the end, and he's sort of walking around grieving. And Alice, they say to Alice, why don't you go to him? And she goes out to him, and he kind of comes towards her, and he starts to realize William knew, because Sylvie had taught him, the feelings that he was now starting to feel, all of these emotions, they are all related to love. It had been withheld from him. He never thought he deserved any love. And then he allowed it in. And he realized that he actually loved the young woman who was now sitting next to him. And actually, as he thought about it, he'd loved her from the day she was born. He knows the family are now looking from the windows. They're looking down at the garden, right? And he says he knows they're filled with hope. If William and Alice could sit side by side and talk, anything could happen. Julia could share her life with her sisters again. Rose could lay down all her family grudges and walk forward. Kent, who had gotten a divorce, could find a new love. William felt as though Sylvie was peering through the window, and Charlie too. And he thinks to himself, I'm going to make you proud. I promise you, I'm going to make you all proud. And he's sitting on the bench and he's talking with Alice, and it's so lovely how it ends, because Alice says, I know I don't know you, to William, but I feel like I do. It's weird though, because I also feel like I don't know who I am. And William says, for a long time, Sylvie knew me better than I knew myself. I think sometimes we need another pair of eyes. We need people around us. And he remembered the footnotes from his manuscript. What am I doing? Why am I doing this? Who am I? He senses these questions inside his daughter, and he tells her, I know you can do this on your own, but if you'll allow me, I'd like to help.
How old is Alice there?
Yeah, I was going to ask that too.
How old is Alice?
She's in her 20s at that
She's
point.
in her 20s.
20.
Oh.
Why am I thinking 27 or something? I don't know. She's
Really? Oh.
She was a mature 20s because she hadn't had any relationships, and that was odd. She wasn't interested. She didn't.
And she was still a virgin. It bothered Julia
Yeah.
that her daughter had no desire for intimacy. And at one point she says to her mother, why are you bothering me about a man? You don't have a man. You didn't need a man in your life. So she had picked up that confidence from Julia. Unfortunately, she didn't pick up any of that other part.
And
But yet
also,
she
Julia,
was seeking her out. She did want to seek out her father. She was going to seek him out. Yeah. Judy, what were you going to say?
I was going to say she also picked up from her mother like a distaste or distrust of men.
Yes,
Yeah.
she did. Which is why she couldn't have any intimacy with anybody. Yeah.
And
There's
it was
a few other
it was-
things. I think a very important person in William's life was Kent.
Hmm.
Very
Which,
important.
you know, you tend to only focus on the females in the story, but he also got some very good male companionship and empathy from Kent.
One of the powerful scenes is when he's missing, when he leaves Julia gives her the note, and then he's missing in action. And Kent, Sylvie knows how important Kent is. She calls Kent and they start a search party. And who comes? That entire team. And,
Yes.
and Kent and Sylvie are the only two people who are not surprised by what William did, because they sensed that darkness in him. They knew it. And so they were prepared to look for him and be scared about what they were going to find. Yeah. He's a very, yeah.
Sorry.
Go
I want
ahead.
to comment on what Judy said. I don't think that Julia taught her distrust of men as much as she taught her no need for men. That you don't need a man in your life to be successful. We know that she had a active sex life and all of that. We didn't go into it, and we don't know how much Alice knew of that piece of it, but it was, I can be a success, I can be a rocket, I can achieve, I can get all this, and I don't need to be married, I don't need to have a permanent man in my life. And so I'd like to believe it wasn't that distrust. Maybe it was a little bit, but more, just don't need it.
I don't need him.
What do you think about, though, since we compared Julia to be like Rose, that Julia was a helicopter mom to Alice, and she didn't ever have a chance to like spread those little wings.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think that Julia was so intent on not having her mother's life. And Julia, in a way, I mean, we could say a lot of things about Julia, but she saved herself because she realized this was not the life she wanted. This was not the man that she wanted. And she up and left. And I think Rose was a great character, because when you think about Rose was, for all we know, maybe she was a helicopter parent in the beginning, told her kids one thing: don't follow in my footsteps, don't get pregnant, you must go to school. And the next thing is they don't listen to her. And so she's watching how they're living. And she, you know what? She took care of Charlie till Charlie died. And you know what? She was done.
Yeah.
Except she goes to Florida. She was done. And so Rose saved herself when she could. And in a way, Julia really did save herself, because otherwise she would have perhaps been mired down with, and neither of them, not Julia nor William, would have gotten what they needed. Julia was never going to be able to teach him the love that he did get from Sylvie, or how to love, or how to accept his daughter. Yeah.
And I think Julia, who was so much like her mother, but saw that her mother's skill set was only to do laundry, is why the education was so important and all of that. And then worked with the professors and moved in that direction. So she was exactly like her mom. And that Charlie was really just the albatross around the neck, which is why you don't need a man. I don't think betrayal or distrust was it as much, but you just don't need a man. And then since she picked a wrong one, it proved to her that I just don't need it.
Right.
And that was the 60s, right? Took place in the 60s.
I'm trying to remember.
60s to 80s.
Yes.
Yeah.
It spans like 30, 40 years. Yeah.
And I think that's an important point, Carol, because 60s, you needed a man. You need to be
Yeah.
married. That's what gave you respect.
Which is why Rose, she was stuck. Rose was
Yeah.
stuck in her mind, good Catholic. She wasn't going to get a divorce. She was stuck. And Julia made up her mind that wasn't going to happen to her. Yeah. It's interesting because each of the girls made bold decisions when you think about it, because obviously Julia saved herself and left. Sylvie risked a lot when she did what she did with William.
Right.
And Cecilia, of course, got pregnant and raised that baby and wasn't going to get married and get tied down. And Emmeline makes the bold decision to come out of the closet and
Which
so each of them were risk takers in their own way. Yeah.
right.
Empowered by Charlie.
Empowered by Charlie. Yeah. Judy,
And also we didn't mention all the artwork of all those family members all over the town.
I know. It was great.
I mean, here they come back and they have their own memories just everywhere they look.
Yeah, that was really beautiful.
It was.
Cecilia, and it was cute because Alice finds out about Cecilia by reading about her in some of the art magazines when they talk about, some of the murals that she's done. Yeah, no, it's beautiful. And of course it is the first. What's so powerful also, by the way, now that you mention that, Cecilia wants to give him, when he's separated from the family, from Julia and from Alice, she wants to give him a picture of Alice.
Yeah.
And he can't even see the picture of Alice. Yeah.
Did
I
the
mean,
author say in any of the interviews that Charlie was representative of her father that had died? Or it was, no?
I didn't see that on any of the interviews.
No, I think when
It's-
I read, she made him after, the little
From the
women,
novel, from the novel.
their father,
Yeah.
Mr. I forgot, Louis the Mays.
Alcat. Yeah.
Thank you.
But I wouldn't be surprised if she really saw the similarity also in her own father, because she talks about the fact that obviously it was a huge loss to her, the author, when her father passed away. And you could imagine, I mean, I always felt so bad for anybody that had any kind of a loss during COVID. That was,
Terrible.
it's horrible enough, lonely enough when you have a loss. And then on top of that, such
Can't see them.
isolation. Yeah.
It's
So,
terrible.
yeah. I think people talk about what's really powerful in this book, and when you go to the Oprah interview, what you're going to hear her say, is that the characters are so well developed. And I think Oprah says after she finished this book, she really kept thinking about these characters because they resonated with her. They were so well drawn. And I think she did a good job even with Alice and Izzy, the next generation. And it's so true how, again, Alice was very affected by the way that Julia had smothered her in trying to protect her. And of course, Julia was afraid that she would want to find her father and find Sylvie. So she never really would. That's why she said that her father died,
Which is a horrible thing to do to somebody.
Terrible.
Right. Any other thoughts? Great. Well, this is great. It's always so wonderful sharing our thoughts on these books.
And was there any symbolism in the height thing? I know it was for the basketball, and then she was tall. Nobody else in the family, none of the other women were tall, and she looked like her father. But
yeah, thank you. I think she's making the point that you try to get away from our genetics as much as we want. But you know what? There are certain things you can't get away from with genetics. And that kid was tall. But the other piece in there that she did say in one of her interviews is that she wanted to bring out the idea that, people do comment on anything that's different. And so if you remember, everyone talked to William, and even the opening line that Julia says to William when she wants to meet him and talk to him, she says, "Why are you so tall?" And of course, this one, Alice, went through the same thing. Everybody talked about her tallness. It was a very outstanding feature.
Well, in mental health, the physical anomaly is sometimes what leads to some of the dysfunction that somebody might have. And that is something that height starts very young. And so you're automatically an other at a very young. And if you don't have adults around you to help you normalize that, which he
You get
didn't.
labeled,
Right.
right? Put in a box.
Yeah. So yeah, that was such an outstanding feature. And there was nobody to say to her, "Hey, it's beautiful. You look like a model," there was nobody to say that to her.
I once read to just what you said, that people who are very tall, especially men, people assume they play basketball.
Yeah.
And that's a real problem because, you must play basketball. It's, you can't win.
I think they said it to her too, where you get very defensive, like, "No, I don't." Okay, now.
That's all I'm good for.
Yeah.
But But I think what's interesting with there's so many things when you go back into it and you really think about it that the author did that are very clever in terms of the kinds of themes that she's bringing out.
Yeah.
But I also love the idea of repeating what these parents did. Do you know some families where like one generation didn't speak to parts of the other one? There was a great line in there about Rose. Rose had, when Charlie's funeral, all these people were showing up. By the way, speaking about Charlie, they thought he was such a loser, right? The mother. But in reality, everybody was saying how what a great guy he was.
Well,
He bought
and-
baby formula, right, when they didn't have any money.
Yeah.
What was the other thing? I paid rent for people who couldn't afford it. So you find out what a great guy. But Rose had like a whole structure of grudges against all these people that kept showing up in the funeral line. You know, it was this one they didn't talk to and that one they didn't talk to. And of course, then you see who goes ahead and picks it up, you know. She had picked it up from her mother, and then she went ahead and repeated the same behavior. Okay, guys, I am so glad we did this, so glad we met, and I look forward to seeing you in July. We're going to have another great discussion. You're going to enjoy the book.
Which book is it?
It is The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks.
Oh, that's such a good book.
Such a good book.
I need
That's
to
a great
reread it.
book.
I read it years ago.
Definitely read it so that we can remember it well.
Thank you, Linda.
Linda, as a side note, it really has nothing to do with the book, but I don't know if anybody else uses Madison Reed hair color.
I've
No,
heard of
but
I've heard
hear
of
it advertised.
Yeah, well, it's